All right, you're recording. Some background music. Let's go. Whew. So I hadn't even read this yet. I did spoil it. I saw Fairy Creek Blockade posted the results, but obviously there's always more. Excuse me. There's always more context. Um, but yeah, it's not as much of a live surprise reading, blind reading. But let's get into it. So all the regular stuff: Teal Cedar versus Reinforced Flying Squad. Teal Cedar, unknown persons, blah blah blah. BC, Ministry of Forests, etc. And the named people: Kathleen Code, Carol Tuda, William Jones, Heath, Randy, Saul, Warren, Donna Clark, and AG of Canada. Respondents: the Hayat First Nation as intervener. And before the three justices: Madam Justice Fenlon, Honorable Mr. Justice Butler, Honorable Madam Justice DeWitt Van Oosten. Why are the women Madam and the man is still Mister? I hate the court. On appeal, blah blah blah. List of counsel, yada yada yada. All right. Summary. The appellant appeals from an order refusing to extend an injunction restraining the conduct of protesters interfering in the appellant's logging operations. Turn this music down. The appellant's logging operations. The Chamber's judge found that the absence of an enforcement gap, given the probable use of criminal law, diminished the weight to be given to the public interest in upholding the rule of law by enjoining the protesters from engaging in unlawful activity. The judge concluded that the balance of convenience lay in denying an extension of the injunction, taking into account, the countervailing public interest in protecting the reputation of the court from depreciation through being pulled into the dispute and by being associated with the manner in which police were enforcing the injunction. The appellant contends on appeal that the judge erred in using an enforcement gap analysis in his conclusion that the reputation of the court would be diminished by continuing the injunction and in his weighing of the public interest in upholding the rule of law. Held. Appeal allowed. The availability of the criminal law is not a factor weighing against the granting or extension of a civil injunction to a private entity. The court's reputation, properly characterized, is not depreciated by the grant and enforcement of an injunction to stop unlawful conduct. The conduct of police does not tarnish the reputation of the court. The court and the police are constitutionally independent. The public interest in upholding the rule of law continues to be the dominant public interest in cases involving civil disobedience against a private entity. That is depressing. This constitutionally independent thing is like laughable. All right, table of contents. Unlawful conduct in issue, history of injunction orders, hearing below, on appeal, analysis. Did the judge err in conducting an enforcement gap analysis and in concluding there was no enforcement gap? Did the judge err by finding the court's reputation would be diminished by continuing the injunction? Did the judge err by giving insufficient weight to the public interest in upholding the rule of law? I like that they gave links because no other ones I've read have that. But let's carry on. If you guys have any questions, please hop into the Twitch and send a message. IG chat is not conducive to this because it disappears after like 3 lines. All right, reasons for judgment of the court. This appeal arises from a judge's refusal to extend an interlocutory civil injunction that protected lawful logging operations from unlawful interference by protesters. The case is not about the wisdom of government forest policy. It is decidedly not about the court's views on whether and where old growth logging should occur in this province, even in the context of climate change. In an injunction application, those are matters outside of the constitutional competence of the courts and exclusively within the constitutional purview of the government elected by the citizens of British Columbia. This case is, rather, about the principles that apply when a court is asked to enjoin a significant and persistent unlawful conduct by those who choose to abandon the democratic process and impose their will on others by force. Let's read that again. Just, this case is rather this case is rather about the principles that apply when a court is asked to enjoin significant and persistent unlawful conduct by those who choose to abandon the democratic process and impose their will on others by force. Cool. That is the nature of the conduct sought to be addressed by the injunction. That is the nature of the conduct sought to be addressed by the injunction, not peaceful protest that occurs within the law. Okay. Just going to say right now, nowhere has anyone actually defined what is peaceful and what is not. So even here, that is the nature of the conduct sought to be addressed by the injunction, not the peaceful protest. They haven't addressed this yet. And if they do, that'll be the first time that I've heard it or read it in any of these readings. And it's such a... They use it all the time, and they never define it. And that's like such a useful tool to them, and it's really annoying. Anyways, last line. There's a clear demarcation between the type of conduct displayed in this case and the actions of lawful protesters who use peaceful means to persuade the government to change policy. Show me where the peaceful means have persuaded government to change policy. I would demand that. And if peaceful means do not work, what's that line? You make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting hot already. I'm only 3 paragraphs in. The unlawful conduct in issue. The unlawfulness of the conduct Teal Cedar seeks to enjoin is not in dispute. Indeed, the respondents argue that an injunction is not needed because the conduct is criminal in nature and thus can be dealt with under the criminal code. Destroying or damaging property, rendering property dangerous, obstructing or interfering with use of property, mischief that causes actual danger to life, and blocking or obstructing a highway. In plain language, the conduct in issue involves protesters digging trenches in roads, sometimes at cliff edge, which impede emergency vehicles and put roads at risk of collapse. Okay. Protesters lock themselves into the bottom of trenches, some of which are up to 8 feet deep. There was like 2 that were 8 feet deep, and 1 that was even deeper. The occupants and the RCMP officers who remove them are at risk of being smothered should the trench walls fail. Chaining themselves into sleeping dragon devices, which are sometimes encased in concrete, embedded in a metal box, fortified with metal hazard, barbed wire, or spikes, and filled with dry oats to prevent police use of scoping cameras. Sounds pretty badass to me. Constructing barricades to make the road impassable for vehicles. One They did it again. One barricade was covered with piles of human feces and jars of urine, which RCMP members had to remove. Wow. They really ate that up. Hot tip to everyone watching in the court, that literally didn't happen. They just said it to creep out the officers, and they threw their hands up and walked away. But they really leaned on it. Placing objects on helicopter landing pads, which poses grave safety risks. Yeah, only if they try to land on it. Sorry. Suspending themselves over roadways and over and under bridges in devices called tripods, bipods, and cantilevers. The tripods reach heights of 30 feet, are hastily constructed, and structurally unsafe. Occupiers armor the legs of their tripods with railroad spikes or chicken wire to prevent RCMP from using tools to dismantle the tripods from the bottom. Some tripod sitters place nobody placed a noose around their neck. One protester locked himself to a tripod with his face close to an array of nails so the nails would injure him if an arresting officer touched him. Protesters have poured jars of urine down from atop of the tripods to force the RCMP to leave them in place. Again, what do you want them to do with their pee? Like, they also have to drop it. Like, they went up there for 3 days, sitting in the sun. Occupying tree sits, which are structures suspended high in the trees. To extract these protesters, specialized RCMP officers must climb the trees or conduct an aerial removal using a helicopter and a line hoist apparatus. Those are insane. Protesters have more recently fortified the bottoms of the trees in which they sit with barbed wire or metal structures to make extraction more difficult. That is weird because, like, there haven't been tree sits in so long. This does read like a direct action manual, but I didn't say that. That was in the comments. I'm impartial. Where am I at? For those on Instagram, join on Twitch if you want to see my screen or send me a message. All right. Teal Steeder also describes harassment of its employees, incidents of vandalism and theft, and damage to safety equipment and machinery used by police to extract the protesters from tripods. It also says protesters have partially cut trees to create a risk to police in areas where they are enforcing the injunction. There is no doubt that one or more of the respondents form part of a protesting group that is committed, sophisticated, and well organized. Protesters have used social media to raise over $1 million to date. They make use of the internet to recruit individuals for specific tasks, such as camp support, obstacle construction, transportation, and occupation of obstacles. They have a command and control network, a communication system to coordinate their activities, a transportation network, and dedicated construction areas and supply camps. They use drones to surveil the police and have used helicopters to resupply their camps. The methods used by those obstructing the roads have become more extreme over time. The police have removed 350 protesters from Sleeping Dragons and at least 100 from tripods set up in the middle of the roads. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I love these lines. They've been in, like, every appeal. Every judge has just, like, taken that as fact. And it seems a little hyperbolic to be like, they have a command and control network. The kids are using the internet. Like, dude, it's a bunch of, like, the transportation network is like a bunch of old ladies in Victoria driving people around and driving a bus full of hippies to the forest. It's not like a clandestine network of operatives. It's just, God, they're so sensitive, these snowflakes. These actions are intended to prevent Teal Cedar from exercising rights granted to it by the provincial government under Tree Farm License 46 to log on southern Vancouver Island, including a portion of the Fairy Creek watershed. The respondents began blockading roads at various locations in and around TFL 46 in August 2020, citing opposition to old growth logging in Fairy Creek. In September 2020, the government announced a deferral of old growth logging in 9 areas throughout the province, but TFL 46 was not one of them. So why do they even mention it? It's not even relevant. And they outline that, like, they're not here to set policy. And in this case isn't about government policy. So why are they even mentioning the deferral? Only to say that TFL was not one of them. It's like saying, but look, they do care. But they don't really. But look, they tried. Anyways. In June 2021, the government announced a 2-year deferral of old growth logging in the Fairy Creek watershed. Despite these changes in forest policy, the response roadblocks will continue in order to prevent TLC from logging activities in the area available. Blah, blah, blah. They did not defer logging in Fairy Creek. They did not. Again, I hate that these things get accepted as fact and the courts don't question them. So this constitutionally independent bullshit is just such a lie. I hate it. Okay. Excuse me. Still working on my bagel. The actions of the respondents and like-minded protesters have affected the rights of others as well. TFL 46 overlaps with the traditional territories of the Pacheedaht First Nation and Dididat First Nation, both of which have consented to and support the planned logging. I'm not going to get into it. These nations have asked the protesters to leave their territory and to respect their right to decide how best to manage their resources. Those requests have not been heeded. Again, this sentence, these nations have asked the protesters, band councils have asked, I'm just not going to break it down because it's so frustrating, like, the discussion. It's not how to manage their resources. It's like they've been offered a benefit agreement. They don't really have a say in anything. They don't even get consent. They're just consulted. So it's not even about managing their resources. It's just like a buyout that they take, which is like the only option they have. So why blame them? We shouldn't. Yeah, the whole system is broken. The history of injunction orders. We're on to the next section. Justice Verhoeven, who I will be seeing later at 2 today, granted the injunction issue on April 1st, 2021, enjoining the blockades. Appropriately and consistent with the Supreme Court of Canada's endorsement of the practice in McMillan Blodell v. Simpson, he included enforcement terms authorizing the police to arrest and remove people who breach the injunction. When Teal's application for the injunction came before him in March 2021, the protesters had created 8 blockades at various locations throughout TFL 46 and adjacent access roads. Excuse me. 2020, blah, 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 sorry. Okay. Some of the blockades had remained in place for many months. Verhoeven concluded Teal would suffer irreparable harm if the injunction was not granted, saying, Teal employs approximately 450 people within its processing and manufacturing facilities. If Teal is unable to log within the area of TFL 46, it will not have an adequate timber supply for its mills. It may be forced to shut down its mills, resulting in layoffs of employees and Teal's inability to supply its customers. Teal estimates that the end product value of the products it will produce from the timber sourced from TFL 46 is approximately $20 million. Teal stands to lose market share and to suffer damage to its reputation as a reliable supplier of its products. Blockades have prevented Teal's road contractor, Stone Pacific, from winterizing logging roads located in steep mountainous terrain, which is necessary to prevent road washouts, erosion, environmental damage. Some of the protesters' activities have caused safety risks. Some protesters have ignored signage and entered active work areas while blasting and other construction work is taking place. They have left fires unattended in dry conditions. Highly unlikely. Some of Stone Pacific's equipment has been vandalized. They have not kept a safe distance away from Stone Pacific's trucks. A female Stone Pacific truck driver was harassed and intimidated by a protester named Hans on December 17th, 2020. The incident was reported to the RCMP. The losses extend. I love how, like, there's one thing here, and that gets reported to the RCMP, but we can't include, like, I better see at least one of the complaints related to the RCMP brought up. But, you know. Anyways. As an incident reported, it's not even like a finding. The guy didn't, like, go to court. It's literally just a report. And it gets included within this decision as, like, fact. Sorry. Getting hot again. The losses extend to Teal's contractors and their employees. Stone Pacific lost $3,500 per day for each day its operations were prevented, and its employee lost wages of $350 to $400 each day for each day of work lost. Sorry, who's making $400 a day on driving a truck? Anyways. Next paragraph, by May 2021, the proceedings had been assigned to the judge below to case manage. Police had begun enforcement operations in mid-May 2021, and hundreds had been arrested for allegedly violating the injunction order. Some had been released with a warning. Some had been released after entering into a police-issued undertaking that included promises to appear in court and not to return to the injunction area. Those who had refused to sign the police undertakings had been brought before judges of the court and released on terms considered appropriate in the circumstances. The judge concluded that the BC Prosecution Service should be invited to assume conduct of contempt proceedings against those protesters who refused to comply with the terms of the injunction order. In doing so, he noted that there was, in the case before him, an important public interest in fostering respect for the rule of law, including the ability of courts to enforce their processes and maintain their dignity and respect. Wow. Like, in what world are you in fostering respect for the rule of the law? Like, we better charge these people, you know, to promote respect for the rule of law. The matter came before the judge again on July 14th to 15th, when a consortium of media organizations and two respondents, Saul Arbus and Susan Gage, applied to limit the RCMP's access to TFL 46, use of checkpoints, and large exclusion zones. In reasons indexed at blah blah court case, the judge found that the RCMP had not shown that their exclusion zones and checkpoints were reasonably necessary to carry out their enforcement duties, and went beyond what was lawful under the common law ancillary powers doctrine. This reminds me, I have a piece of information that I can report on from an ATIP that I'm going to write about later, where the RCMP was instructed This is a leak, not a leak. Sorry, this is like a breaking story. So anyone listening, you're gonna get it now before I write it. The RCMP was instructed before enforcement began by the Solicitor General's office or the ministry um, that what was it? That exclusion zones and checkpoints that the RCMP creates or operates should not be applied to members of the media. That they should not restrict members of the media from gaining access to the territory. That if they make them, these checkpoints, media are free to access. So they were told that before enforcement even began. Again, their initial set of like orders, and yeah, obviously we know they did not respect that. Um, yeah, pretty shitty. ACAB. All right, where were we? All right, paragraph 14. The matter came before the judge again. Oh, yeah, I already read this. 15. The judge recognized the exclusion zones, checkpoints, and searches were all effective, rational strategies for preventing people from breaching the order. And that if the public were allowed vehicle access and searches were not conducted, the transport of persons inclined to breach the injunction and transport of material to be used for this purpose would likely accelerate. He agreed that in order to prevent escalation of injunction violations, it was difficult to conceive of effective measures short of a police blockade. But he concluded that when the order was read accurately as arrest and remove rather than prevent, the police could not show that their use of geographically and temporally expansive exclusion zones and associated access checkpoints were reasonably necessary. He described the resulting impact of the right of citizens to be left alone on freedom of movement and on peaceful assembly. Hello, person on Twitch. I love your name. Linthole420. He described the resulting impact on the right of citizens, yada yada, peaceful assembly and freedom of the press as substantial and serious. Thank you. But noted it was open to the RCMP to apply to vary the order if public access to the roads in the injunction area was making the arrest and removal duty unsafe. So it's like a nothing burger. Nothing happened. Alright, I'm done my bagel. You don't have to watch me eat anymore. The hearing below. On September 14th, 2021, the parties were once more before the court. The RCMP took up the judge's suggestion and applied to amend the terms of the order to include more expansive measures to prevent protesters from engaging in unlawful activities. 2 individuals applied to constrain the RCMP and the methods used to do extractions. Other individuals sought a declaration that the RCMP's access control measures were unlawful and sought a declaration that they be found in contempt. Teal Cedar sought a 1-year extension of the injunction, the application underlying its appeal. At the request of the judge, the contempt application was adjourned before the hearing. The judge heard the other 3 applications, but ultimately addressed only Teal Cedar's motion, concluding that the others were moot given his refusal to extend the injunction. The judge began his analysis by referring to Judge Thompson's appealed decision here in the hearing. The judge began his analysis by referring to the well-known 3-part test governing applications for an injunction set out in RJR McDonald v. Canada. Is there a serious issue to be tried? Number 1. Number 2. will the person applying for the injunction suffer irreparable harm if the injunction is not granted? 3. Does the balance of convenience favor granting the interlocutory injunction or denying it? I did do a reading and like a breakdown of these after researching this case, RJR McDonald. Um, it was really educational. Yeah, I'm really glad I did because it keeps coming up. The fundamental question on both an initial application for an injunction and a request to extend is whether granting of an injunction is just and equitable in all of the circumstances of the case. The judge concluded without hesitation that T.L. Cedar met the first two branches of the RJR McDonald test. I don't really remember the first one being like without hesitation. And like there was no debate really. Like obviously they have an issue. Like they are being blockaded heavily. The irreparable harm section number 2 is it's weird. It's weirdly defined in RJR as like I forgot how they say it, but it's like the scale of the harm is not doesn't matter. So like, you know, let's say Teal Cedar is like a $5 billion company, but if they suffered $1,000 in damages that they were unable to recover from due to the blockade, that would qualify as irreparable harm. The same as if they were like a one-person operation, you know, $100,000 company, and they suffered $1,000 in damages. Either way, if the damage was irreparable, if they could not recover from that, it couldn't be repaired, it would qualify, which is, yeah, it's not really a great. It's kind of a useless analysis because you could argue anything is irreparable. And the balance of convenience is the thing I wrote about that like that's the decision that Thompson made. And I obviously like sided with Thompson, but I kind of broke it down a bit. Anyways, carry on. The application to extend the injunction failed on the third branch, which, yeah, I just said. The judge found the balance of convenience favored refusing the injunction given his weighing of various factors affecting the public interest. The judge squarely and correctly rejected the respondent's contention that the rejected the respondent's contention that the protesters' goal of protecting a rare ecosystem in the context of a climate crisis should be weighed as a public interest factor, saying, to take account of this type of public interest would amount to contempt of constitutional constraints on judicial powers. To borrow a phrase from Justice Voight's judgment in Cermak, such considerations are not on the table. Then what's the fucking point? What is the point of you? Sorry. Getting hot again. For those on Instagram, I'm live on Twitch where you can see my screen and we can talk easier. Link is in my bio. Alright, 21. In terms of legally relevant public interest considerations, under the third branch, the judge recognized that the public interest most often considered and weighed heavily in civil disobedience cases is the protection of the exercise of private rights from illegal obstruction, more succinctly described as the public interest in the rule of law. He observed that in many cases, the importance of upholding the rule of law may be the only public interest consideration. But he found that was not so in the present case. The judge identified several countervailing public interest factors. The public's prima facie right to access, I'm butchering the pronunciation, right to access the roads in TFL 46, whether public order should be maintained by enforcement of the criminal code rather than by injunction, the strong public interest in maintaining the court's reputation by keeping it away from the front lines of the dispute and protecting it from being tarnished by police conduct. Sorry, just dwelling on that last one. The judge suggested that the way to balance these public interests and the public interest in protecting persons trying to exercise a lawful interest from those using unlawful actions to stop them is to ask whether there is an enforcement gap. If the applicant has established that a gap exists, the scale tips towards issuing an injunction to protect the applicant. If the applicant fails to establish an enforcement gap, less weight should be given to the protection of private rights. In other words, the judge concluded that if other means of stopping the unlawful conduct exist, there is less need for an injunction and less weight should be given to the fundamental concern about upholding the rule of law. The judge concluded such was the case in the matter before him, finding that the unlawful conduct could be dealt with by prosecuting the people responsible for criminal code offenses, since Parliament has spoken in clear terms about damaging, destroying, or interfering with the use of property, and about blocking or obstructing roads for the purpose of compelling others to abstain from doing what they have a lawful right to do. Holy fucking run-on sentence. Like, Jesus. Alright, paragraph 23. The judge was, of course, being asked to extend an existing injunction. He recognized that Verhoeven had placed a lot of weight on the need to stop illegal interference with Thiel's lawful rights and the rule of law implications of allowing the illegal behavior to continue. The judge noted that standing behind lawful rights promotes the rule of law and is undoubtedly in the public interest. Man, like, I think people that are in this system, that are judges and lawyers, probably spend too much time in there. And I think they need a vacation. Like, if anything, people's faith in, like, the rule of law is diminished. You know, not just the people that were arrested, the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people locally in the province that support this. Like, their perception of the rule of law, you know, and that its value and, you know, ability to, you know, bring justice, which we know it can't do, but, like, let's just speak plainly. Like, you know, a lot of regular folks, you know, think justice will come from the courts. And, you know, even those people are disheartened after this past year. All right. Where are we at? Okay, paragraph 24. Although Verhoeven had not assessed the original application for an injunction using the judge's enforcement gap analysis, the judge inferred that Verhoeven must have concluded there was an enforcement gap, since he said that refusing the application would leave Thiel Cedar with no remedy. He assumed that the behavior of those blocking the roads in the period leading up to the hearing before Verhoeven may not have risen to the level required to make criminal charges a real prospect. Again, it's like their ultimate goal is applying a criminal charge. Like, that is dispensation of justice. That is the outcome they want. And, like, I know people who are going to get charged with criminal contempt, do their fine, pay a service, whatever, like, or pay a fine, do their service, whatever it is, and they're going to go right back. Like, I know people that were arrested and like in the morning processed and showed back up at the front line that day. Like, if justice doesn't, like, if this idea of dispensing justice doesn't work, like, then the system doesn't work. Anyway, they charge him more, put him in jail. We're going to put people in jail for protecting trees. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. The judge's enforcement gap analysis caused him to significantly reduce the weight to be given to the rule of law public interest concern posed by continued illegal interference with Teal Cedar's lawful activities. But he did not take it off the scales entirely, recognizing that there was still a risk that the criminal law would not be used or would not be effective in addressing the illegal behavior that continued to plague Teal Cedar. Sorry, what? The judge's enforcement gap analysis caused him to significantly reduce the weight to be given to the rule of law public interest concern posed by continued illegal interference with Teal Jones' lawful activities. Okay. Yeah, basically saying that the criminal law was there, it should be sufficient, but that it might not be. Continuing with the balancing exercise, the judge noted the significant impact of the illegal activity on Teal Cedar's operations and on the First Nations who had approved the logging. Again, band councils do not give consent. Band councils do not approve logging. They do not have any rights to say that they don't approve. That logging happens regardless. Oh, sorry, I just got an email from a lawyer. Ugh. I've talked to so many lawyers. So many lawyers. Seriously. More lawyers than I ever thought I would speak to in my life. Okay, where were we? Continuing the balancing exercise, First Nation. Despite according significant weight to these considerations, favoring the extension of the injunction, the judge found the following countervailing factors outweighed them. Government and police could and should use provincial laws such as Forest and Range Practices Act and the criminal law, as well as lawful preventative policing measures such as patrolling the roads to stop unlawful activity. The court's reputation had been depreciated by the manner in which the police enforced the injunction order, primarily. Oh my god! I'm sorry. I'm already triggered. This is going to be hard. A. The use of overly expansive exclusion zones. Yes, obviously. B. Interference with media rights to freely access TFL 46. Doy. C. Command decisions to remove individual identification of officers because of concerns about harassment on social media. And D. Failure of command to enforce an RCMP directive not to wear thin blue line patches on their uniforms, which deeply offends some citizens, including some Indigenous protesters. Thank you for addressing it. Thank you to these judges for making sure they included this in here. But again, like, complaints really are my wheelhouse in this regard. And 260 complaints filed regarding Fairy Creek. 226 of them have no officers identified. You could argue that, sure, he addresses that in section C, that their removal of their identification. But, like, what about the fact that there are 260 complaints? Like, what about that? And people are still filing them. Like, there are more coming. Um, Most of these involve like they are brutal. They are vile. Like people have broken bones. People have concussions. People have been assaulted. People have been sexually assaulted. Like truly abhorrent behavior. Um, and to see none of that addressed in there is like to me is deeply troubling. Um, and obviously, I'm biased because I just know more and have more information because that's what I've been doing. But again, this then ties into like what I just reported on, which I'm not allowed to discuss the contents of, but I'm allowed to discuss what happened. And after this, I'm probably going right into the hearing at 2, where I'll just like live tweet about it or just like talk about it. I can't stream it. You can't stream court proceedings. Um, but if people have questions, please feel free to ask. Anyways, I would agree the court's reputation is depreciated by their behavior. Um, I have more to say, but it's like if I have a narc watching, like I'm probably breaching these conditions by speaking in more detail about my piece and what I have. So carrying on. ACAB. The judge therefore concluded that it was not just and equitable in all circumstances of the case to extend the injunction in paragraph 89. Teal contends the judge made 3 significant errors, requiring it to establish an enforcement gap and finding that a gap no longer existed. 2, concluding that the reputation of the court would be diminished by continuing the injunction, and giving insufficient weight to the public interest in upholding the rule of law and preventing irreparable harm to Teal Cedar and others. Teal Cedar is a bunch of crybabies. You can sue me for defamation. I don't give a shit. The judge's refusal to extend the injunction is discretionary and entitled to significant deference. An appellate court may only interfere if the judge erred in principle, gave no or insufficient weight to relevant considerations, considered irrelevant factors, or made a decision that is so clearly wrong as to amount to an injustice. I feel like Thompson just got tossed around. Like he got fucked left, right, and center. Like no one agreed with him anywhere. We conclude with great respect to the judge below that these errors have been established on appeal and form the basis of his decision. We would accordingly allow the appeal and extend the injunction. Excuse me. All right, we still got quite a bit. We're about halfway. Analysis. Did the judge err when conducting an enforcement gap analysis and concluding there was no enforcement gap? I'm just going to go get some more water, and I'll be back.
Mic off. Mic on.
Okay. Where are we? Analysis. Joust. Come here. Joust, come. Come on. Joust, come. Good girl. What's up, buddy? All right. In our view, the judge made 2 errors in this part of his analysis. First, he erred in law by considering the availability of charges in prosecution for criminal code offenses as a factor, weighing against the granting of an injunction to a private applicant. I don't know the law enough to really comment on that. He committed a palpable and overriding error of fact by finding that criminal law would be used in this case to prevent ongoing harm to Teal Cedar. The result has been to upend the law of injunctions by considering, under the third branch of the R.J. McDonald test, matters unrelated to the interests of the parties before the court. Considering the availability of the criminal law as a factor in the balance of convenience. In conducting this analysis, the judge recognized that the availability of the criminal law to stop the type of conduct engaged in by the protesters was not a bar to the court issuing an injunction. That point had been settled by Simpson, a case arising out of similar logging protests in which injunctions had been issued and upheld by a majority of this court. An issue in Simpson was whether the court had jurisdiction to enjoin criminal conduct. Justice Wood, in dissent, was of the view that the court did not, observing that it is the function and responsibility of the Attorney General, as the chief law officer, to see that the criminal law is enforced. McMillan Blodell v. Simpson. That's just citing. The Supreme Court of Canada agreed. The Supreme Court of Canada disagreed. J. McLaughlin was writing for the court, observed that the Attorney General of British Columbia had a specific policy not to lay criminal charges against environmental groups engaging in civil disobedience, but to leave it to affected parties to seek injunctive relief. Responding to Wood's opinion that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General to enforce criminal law, she said, "Every citizen would endorse these words. Yet, as this case demonstrates, to state the obligation of the Attorney General is not to ensure that it will be discharged in such a way as to provide the required protection to citizens injured by the conduct of others. It is to fill this gap that the equitable remedy of injunctions which not only the parties but also all others must respect on peril of being found in contempt of court, has developed." So, I don't know about you guys, but since receiving my very own injunction, and if there is a narc watching, you can quote me on this, the peril of being found in contempt of court does not seem very perilous. Like, maybe I need a bigger charge. Like, I'm not scared of being found in contempt. Like, I hadn't heard a good argument to take my piece down until, like, the 4th or 5th lawyer that I spoke to. And even then, it was, like, a very difficult choice. And I don't feel 100% on it. Like, I don't know. I'm just speaking for myself, but like, I don't think people are too concerned about being found in contempt of court. It was on the basis of McLaughlin's reference to injunctions filling the gap that the judge concluded an important consideration in deciding whether, excuse me, to continue Teal Cedar's injunction was whether the enforcement gap that existed in the Simpson case is present in current circumstances. At paragraph 38, citing. If a gap is established, the judge concluded when the public interest in the need to stand against those using unlawful actions to intervene with lawful interests and thus avoid leaving the applicant without a remedy must be given greater weight than the reputational concern about the court's legitimacy and effectiveness being compromised by being pressed to the front line of the dispute between protesters and a logging company. Put another way, the judge found the public interest in granting an injunction to protect legal rights should be given less weight when the criminal law could be used to stop unlawful behavior. Crazy that there's actually a precedent for that, for reputational concern about the court's legitimacy. In our view, the enforcement gap principle applied by the judge is not consistent with Simpson. In that case, the Supreme Court of Canada recognized that equitable injunctions are the means by which parties who cannot enforce the criminal law obtain protection for the exercise of their lawful rights. In other words, because a private applicant cannot ensure that the police and prosecutors will initiate and pursue criminal law proceedings to provide the required protection, there will always be a gap. Okay. Maybe we all just need to file injunctions. You know, if you want police to do their job, you literally need an injunction. Because a private applicant, i.e., a private citizen, cannot ensure that the police and prosecutors will initiate and pursue criminal law proceedings to provide required protection. Like, egg on your face, motherfucker. Not that police keep us safe and like I am an abolitionist through and through, but I just love it. I just love the cell phone here. You know? It's just nice. Simpson squarely rejected that the argument that an injunction ought not to issue when the alternative remedy of the criminal law may be available, as noted in this court, but in Interford v. Sim, blah, 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 citing... In the present case, the judge found it was likely that the criminal law would be enforced by the police and the BC Prosecution Service because of the nature of the conduct in issue. However, he did not go on to examine whether that course of action, even assuming he was correct, would be effective in protecting Teal Cedar's rights. Teal's concern is to stop the unlawful activity so that it can get on with exercising its rights. As this court observed in Sim, an injunction and the use of contempt powers to enforce it are a more effective, relatively expeditious remedy, devoid of the legal requirements and added process burdens of trying to enforce sections of the criminal code. Does anyone challenge Teal Cedar's rights? Does anyone like it's unceded land? We know this. I'm not going to get sidetracked. I'm going to keep going. But, like, fuck them. Paragraph 36. An injunction, unlike the criminal law, can be tailored to the facts of a given situation. It can be time limited, geographically limited, and varied on application. As the judge noted in an earlier ruling, it can serve as a valuable educational and informational purpose. providing greater clarity to both the public and the police regarding the limits of permissible activities and police enforcement. Variation reason, more citation. In contrast, criminal law is a blunt instrument that moves more slowly and may be less effective in solving the immediate problem of blockades. Yeah, don't worry. I am still recording, and it'll be up on YouTube afterwards. Where was I? Section 36. In contrast, the criminal law is a blunt instrument that moves more slowly and may be less effective in solving the immediate problem of blockades that interfere with lawful activity. The injunction has been used pretty bluntly. Having been there, I think most people would agree they just use it like a blunt tool to remove everybody. Anyways. For example, the injunction in this case addressed safety concerns by prohibiting protesters from coming within 50 meters of certain vehicles, equipment, and machinery. The criminal law has no equivalent in the absence of an arrest and release on conditions. The injunction also gives the RCMP authority to remove illegal blockades in a clearly delineated area and prohibits specific illegal behavior. The criminal code provisions, such as blah blah blah, are more equivocal. The judge drew support for his approach from a long line of cases in which judges have decried and perceived failure of the police and the BC Prosecution Service to fulfill their unique and independent roles in enforcing the criminal law in the face of persistent civil disobedience. However, in every one of those cases, the court determined that the injunction sought must issue because the rule of law and fairness to the applicant demanded no less. In short, despite judges expressing trenchant criticism of police and prosecution policies, none suggested that the private applicant should be left to rely on the criminal law. Excuse me. I really want to meet these judges with trenchant criticism of police. In Alfred Bay Logging, Nanaimo v. Mikajlowicz, one of the cases cited by the judge in support of his approach, Judge Williamson commented that an injunction would be unnecessary if there were no gap in criminal law enforcement, i.e., the Attorney General ensured the effective use of criminal proceedings that would actually prevent irreparable harm. In a subsequent decision in the same proceeding, Judge Williamson said, thus, when law enforcement authorities fail to protect the legal rights of litigants, such as the plaintiff, the court, if all other aspects of the requisite test for the granting of an injunction have been met, must come to the aid of the wronged party. That is the law in this province has been settled by the Supreme Court of Canada in McMillan Blodell v. Simpson. Like, I just cannot believe this line. If all other aspects of the requisite test for the granting of an injunction have been met, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait here. So when law enforcement authorities fail to protect the legal rights of litigants and all other aspects of the test have been met, the court must come to the aid of the wronged party. Like, it just assumes a lot. And it's like blatantly biased. It's basically saying that, like, they have to side, they by law, by like precedent, by Supreme Court of Canada precedent, they have to side with the party seeking the injunction. Like, from the beginning, they are required to sign with the wronged party. And that's why use of injunctions are being used in a way that abuses the legal system. It's an abuse of power. Not RCMP, the courts. The courts have an obligation to side with the wronged party. So, like, what recourse does the other party have? Like, that's injunction law is so fucking stupid. And like governments use injunctions in lieu of laws to get what they want, because you don't have to go through like a lawmaking body. You just use the courts. And like in my situation, I asked for comment, and instead of like a response, which they said they would give me a response, instead of that, they sent me an injunction. Like a member of the media asked for comment and got responded with an injunction. Like, not even a conversation, not even like, hey, you're not supposed to have this document. We're going to be taking legal action. It was just like, bam, we've personally named you in an injunction because you have a document that you shouldn't have. Like, how fucking insane is that? Like, blows my fucking mind. Excuse me. All right, carry on. We're 2/3 of the way down almost. Paragraph 39. We conclude the weight of the jurisprudence is entirely against the approach taken by the judge in the present case. The respondents could not identify a single case in which a court refused to enjoin a persistent illegal interference with private rights on the basis that the applicant could not establish that the criminal law would not suffice. As the respondents candidly acknowledged on appeal, the enforcement gap principle adopted by the judge would lead inevitably to the conclusion that the more egregious the behavior of the protesters, the less likely it is that an injunction will be granted, a principle entirely at odds with the court's obligation to uphold the rule of law. That is not to say that the availability of means other than an injunction to prevent unlawful conduct, such as provincial statutory offenses, new legislative initiatives, or protective remedies, or demonstrated consistent and effective engagement of the criminal law in a particular scenario, can never be relevant to the injunction analysis. God, I hate these enormous sentences that these people write. I name what that document was. Which document? The one that explained that they must come to the aid of the wronged party. If you're on Twitch, so. Oh, can I name what that document was? Yeah. I'm in possession of a McNeil disclosure. That's going to be identified in their application today at 2. Or it is in the application that they sent me. They are aware that I'm in possession of it, and because they are aware of that, they are seeking an injunction preventing me from discussing its contents and continuing my publication of it. And yeah, basically. And as we just described, the court has a duty to side with the wronged party. I have an opportunity to give submissions to the court, but I don't even know what I would. I'm not a lawyer. Well, they were leaked. They were leaked to me. I can't really get into much detail. But the person that had it, many other people have the same document. And this person, and there might be more than one person, because there were 3 media outlets named in the application, myself, the Capital Daily, and another person. More than one person might have leaked it to other outlets because it's that damning, but we don't know. Sorry, where was I? 39. All right, 40. If those means were being employed, I'm just going to start over. Okay, that is not to say that the availability of means other than an injunction to prevent unlawful conduct, such as provincial statutory offensive, new legislative initiatives, or protective, blah, 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 blah. If those means were being employed in a manner that caused unlawful protesters to stand down, that would be relevant to whether an applicant could establish irreparable harm. The availability of other options is particularly relevant when it is government seeking to obtain an injunction because it has greater ability to access and enforce alternative remedies. As in Baudouin v. BC, blah, blah, blah. Oh, just example. Okay. But the applicant in the present case is not a government entity. Teal Cedar, as a private entity, cannot exert any control over whether the province or BC Prosecution Service enforce the criminal law, nor can Teal Cedar use provincial laws to fine the protesters or legislate more effective remedies. 41. The intervener, Hyatt First Nation, emphasized the difference between government applicants and others seeking an injunction. As a modern treaty nation with jurisdictional rights over resource use, Hyatt First Nation depends on the courts to enforce its laws and uphold its rights. It cannot mobilize the criminal law or find a legislative solution to interference with its resource management decisions. HFN opposes the imposition of any additional evidentiary burden on an applicant seeking an injunction to enforce rights, such as proof that the criminal law could not be used instead. A burden, it says, would make it more difficult to exercise its hard-fought treaty rights and would therefore cut against the overarching object of reconciliation. Oh my God. So, for those that don't know, the elected chief of the Hyatt First Nation, forget his name, this dude blockaded, sat in the street in intersections in Victoria. He fought and fought and fought for rights over his land, his people's land. But, he fought, he got it, he was elected. The guy is through and through a logger and really wanted. It's complicated. It's complicated because he just wants to develop and log and just it's just resource extraction under their name, and I don't know enough about their hereditary leadership. I don't know enough about what goes on internally, but it is a mess to talk about because it is complicated and because he is someone who fought for the rights to that land, to those resources, but then goes and is very pro-logging. Very, very pro-logging. I just wanted to clarify that because people always have something to say when Hyatt comes up. But regardless, it's weird that they jumped in as intervener because this isn't really relevant. It's not on their territory at all. But they really wanted to say something in these cases. And we're not even going to talk about it. They use the word reconciliation. We note parenthetically that the impact of the blockades on First Nations illustrates the importance of the democratic process and rule of law. Unlike the protesters whose single-minded goal is to end old-growth logging, the government must consider and balance many competing interests in developing forest policy and in granting or refusing licenses. Not even going to touch that. The judge's finding that the criminal law would stop the harm. How much more do we have? I'm going to skip this section. About criminal law. Because it's 1:40 and at 2 o'clock I'm going to jump in on this case. This notice of application on my injunction. Sorry, I'm just going to write the court and see if I can get a link to watch it. Okay, I'm going to skip. So this section is the judge's finding that the criminal law would stop the harm. I'm going to skip right ahead to, did the judge err by finding that the court's reputation would be diminished by continuing the injunction? The judge identified a strong public interest in maintaining the court's reputation for legitimacy and effectiveness. He concluded that the court's reputation was being damaged in two ways. First, by being pulled into the middle of the dispute between citizens on one side and a logging company and the government on the other. And second, by the manner in which the police were enforcing the injunction. The court's continued involvement in injunction proceedings. The first reputational concern is closely linked to the judge's view that the police and BC Prosecution Service should be using the criminal laws to sanction significant civil disobedience rather than leaving it to the courts to enforce civil injunctions, which puts courts on the front line of these civil disobedience events. He described the criminal contempt proceedings that followed against those who refused to comply with the injunction as the conversion of the dispute into between citizens and the court. There's little doubt that the type of prolonged and significant civil disobedience demonstrated in this case and the refusal of many protesters to comply with the injunction places great demands on the court, both in terms of recalibrating the injunction and in overseeing criminal contempt hearings and sentencing. But, with respect, it is wrong to say that the court's role in upholding the law, which is the court's obligation, means that its reputation is being harmed. The making of an order enjoining interference with the applicant's lawful rights does not imply approval of the activity. The court is not taking sides. From such questions, the court stands aloof. From such questions, the court stands aloof. But, like, we just read that, they're obliged to side with the wronged party in the granting of an injunction. Like, give me a fucking break. The purpose of the injunction is not to protect the activity, but to uphold the rule of law. It is only to the extent that the public misapprehends the role of the court that the court's that the court's reputation for impartiality and independence from the interests of the parties could be affected. But that is a matter of perception. The answer is to address the misperception head-on. As Chief Justice Essen did in McMillan-Blodell v. Simpson, when he determined to climb on his bench and make a statement to address the public's misunderstanding about the court's role in prosecuting criminal contempt proceedings against unlawful protesters. As Judge Pitfield stated in Inter 4 v. Kern, and here we go. At the end of the day, however, no matter how distasteful the task, the court cannot shirk its responsibility to ensure the rule of law. As affirmed by the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada in Macmillan Plodell v. Simpson, the court will intervene when conduct which may be criminal in nature interferes with the exercise of private property rights. It will do so notwithstanding that the public perception may be that the court is favoring the rights of one party to the detriment of another. It's like just depressing. Like the more I read and the more I read arguments like this, it just becomes so apparent how the courts are like they're literally a tool to uphold the old ways. Like it's built into them to maintain the oldest status quo. You know, they do not change. They do not march towards change. They do not even seem to consider change. Everything seems to be emphasized on how things were done before, which is like inherently conservative. Yeah. Anywho, Section 58. The judge was faced with the complex and challenging task of managing a case involving large-scale civil disobedience. As the Supreme Court of Canada observed in Simpson, the task, the task of the court in these circumstances is to find a way to protect the legitimate exercise of lawful rights while preserving maximum scope for the lawful exercise of the right of expression and protest. At Part 13. It is a task well within the scope of the court's expertise and one that it cannot refuse to undertake. Like, do you think the judge succeeded in that task? Like, to find a way to protect legitimate exercise of lawful rights while preserving the maximum scope for the lawful exercise of the right of expression and protest. Like, once again, we're back into the lawful v. unlawful, and no one is content to say explicitly, this is lawful protest that is allowed. You know, they're very hesitant to define that. And I think most people know it would be pointless. And they know it would be pointless. But they're happy to say when something is unlawful. It's a task well within the court's expertise. Yeah, good job. The court's reputational interest lies in the legitimacy and effectiveness, as the judge observed, blah, blah. Legitimacy is grounded in the court being independent and impartial. Again, we know that they have an obligation to side with the wrong party. Effectiveness is grounded in the court having its orders enforced. No reasonable citizen reading the judge's numerous decisions in this case could question the court's impartiality, independence, or thoughtful concern for the various interests and rights in play before it. As to effectiveness, the injunction order was being enforced by police and through prosecutions for criminal contempt. The court's reputational interest is not concerned with the popularity of its decisions. Don't worry, DC Koopa. It'll be recorded and on YouTube later. The court's reputation, blah blah blah. Or what's that? The court's reputational interest is not concerned with the popularity of its decisions. Countless disputes require the court to make unpopular decisions, whether in staying serious criminal charges because of a breach of the charter or in upholding public health orders. Furthermore, in considering that the court's reputation would be protected by extricating the court from the dispute and leaving enforcement to the police and those responsible for their direction. At paragraph 58, the judge did not consider the reputational harm to the court from both leaving Teal Cedar victim to illegal blockades without a remedy and in failing to uphold the rule of law. Whatever. In cases of persistent and significant civil disobedience, the court has a constitutional role to fulfill. The rule of law demands access to independent courts with the power to enforce the law by granting effective remedies to those individuals whose rights have been violated. To the extent that the judge identified... Sorry. To the extent that the judge identified a reputational concern with the court's ongoing involvement in the prohibition and sanctioning of unlawful conduct by the protesters, we respectfully conclude that he erred. The court's involvement in enjoining unlawful conduct is a necessary and fundamental aspect both of civil society and the rule of law. The effect of police misconduct on the court's reputation. Ooh, here we go. This is juicy. This is my jam. They haven't got back to me with a Teams link for this hearing at 2, so I'm just going to keep reading. Let's go. This is my wheelhouse. We turn now to the second reputational concern the judge identified, the depreciation of the court's reputation by the conduct of the RCMP in enforcing the court order. In our view, the judge's conclusion that the court's reputation can be tarnished by the conduct of police officers is a clear error of law. Don't worry, guys. They're independent of each other. The judiciary is one of 3 branches of government. Blah, blah, blah. The second is the executive, made of the premier and cabinet. The third is the legislature. The RCMP answers to the executive branch, in particular the Solicitor General. So be sure to remember that. Tell, those shitty journalists and the pressers that it is Mike Farnworth who is in charge of the BC RCMP. He cannot pass the buck. We know this, obviously, but I love it when the courts say it. The court and the police are thus constitutionally independent of each other. An example assists in demonstrating this principle. Oh, cool. When a judge issues a search warrant and the police infringe a citizen's rights in executing that warrant, no one could sensibly suggest that the court's reputation had been depreciated. They don't even give an example. They just make it up. Yeah, they don't even give one. They just it was like a straw man. Cite it. Cite one. Any of you guys hear about that couple in Parks on Qualicum Beach? A couple 70-year-old couple. They got raided by a fucking SWAT team. Not even no warrants, nothing. They weren't shown anything. No, they don't even know why their house was targeted. Had to go to the hospital. The hospital was confused. Old man is doesn't know where his wife is. He has no shoes, no keys. They had to put him in a taxi back to his house. Had to break into his own house. Guy's 70 years old, retired, living in Qualicum Beach. RCMP break down his door at 11 at night because they have the wrong house. Anyways, ask him what he feels. Here's an example. Let's call this guy. Let's see how he feels. Do you think he's probably mad at the judge that granted the warrant? Maybe a little. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Ugh, where was I? The administration of justice may be said to have been brought into disrepute by the police conduct, but that overarching systemic impact is not, as the respondents contend, synonymous with the court's reputation. Indeed, where police misconduct has occurred, the court's role is to hold police accountable. That can be done by ruling evidence obtained in an illegal search inadmissible, or by staying criminal proceedings because of improper conduct by the police in investigating or conducting arrests. Okay. Okay, I'm going to explain why this is super fucked. Indeed, where police misconduct has occurred, the court's role is to hold the police accountable. That can be done by ruling evidence obtained in an illegal search inadmissible, or by staying criminal proceedings because of improper conduct by the police in investigating or in conducting arrests. That is not holding the police accountable. Denying the procedure of, an arrest or a charge is not holding them account. It's just like that doesn't hold police accountable for their actions. It literally just stops a charge. In what world does that describe a means of accountability for a police officer who has committed some misconduct against an arrestee, who has caused serious harm? Have they been punished? Have they, are they being charged with something? Are they being in what world is this? This is not accountability. I'm just so mad that that's their definition of it. Anyways, carrying on. 65. Nor does continuation of the injunction amount to an endorsement of unlawful police conduct. As the respondents submit, in both cases cited by the respondents in support of the position that improper police actions undermine judicial authority and independence are cases in which the court found police to be in contempt for failing to comply with the court orders to deliver unexcused to the court to participate in a criminal proceeding. What is this? That's one whole fucking sentence. Jesus Christ. Oh no, from there. The judge's focus on police conduct was perhaps not surprising in light of the record before him. One of the three applications argued at the hearing concerned alleged excesses by police in enforcing the injunction. However, the only application addressed by the judge was Teal Cedar's application to extend the injunction. Police conduct in that context should not have been the central focus. The conduct of an applicant may be relevant in determining whether it is just and equitable to grant an injunction. But the judge made no finding of misconduct by Teal Cedar. Rather, the judge determined that the conduct of a third party, entirely independent of the applicant, weighed against the granting of the injunction. In effect, Teal Cedar was denied a remedy because of the court's concerns about police conduct in enforcing the injunction, conduct Teal Cedar cannot control. We note that ending the injunction and relying on the police to recommend criminal charges and the BC Prosecution Service to approve them would not, in any event, put an end to concerning police conduct. It would simply remove one level of oversight from the interactions between protesters and the RCMP. Nor would it ensure the logging roads would be open to the public, another public interest identified by the judge. As the judge noted, blah blah blah, permits Forest and Range Practices Act permits gates across industry-built logging roads. In addition, the protesters' ongoing barricades on public roads do not conduce to public access. There have not been whatever. While it was open to the judge to address some aspects of police enforcement, such as the size of exclusion zones and restrictions on media access, by altering terms of the injunction, the police as independent actors have discretion as to when and how to enforce court orders. The injunction contains an enforcement clause which expressly recognizes that independence by preserving police discretion on the manner and steps of enforcement. Further, as the judge recognized in paragraph 86, the court has no jurisdiction over police uniforms and identification. It is not the place of the court to oversee police compliance with police policy. Despite this, the judge expressed considerable frustration with these aspects of police behavior, addressing in detail the command decisions of the RCMP to allow frontline members to remove individual identification and to not enforce the directive against wearing thin blue line patches. The judge noted that he had addressed this issue informally at a case management conference, suggesting that the RCMP consider asking their members to remove the patch when enforcing a court order. In response to the Attorney General of BC's position that the matters relating to the RCMP attire for the Commissioner of the RCMP, and that the thin blue line patch was a labor relations matter in which the court should not become involved, the judge said, "Of course, I have no jurisdiction or inclination to make orders about RCMP attire or otherwise become involved in its labor relations. But the RCMP has made a choice not to enforce their direction against wearing of a symbol that it knows is divisive. It must realize that in circumstances where RCMP members are enforcing the court's order, the wearing of the symbol reflects on the court. I intend to do no more than to consider the effect of this regrettable RCMP decision on the court's reputation, which is a relevant public interest consideration on this application." Thank you. That's fucking reasonable. That's like a common sense perception. It's like a fair reading of things. Like Thompson, I think part of the reason he's so disagreed with by everyone is because a lot of his reasoning comes, like, it looks to come along the same sort of, it's got the same lines of thinking that like a regular citizen has. Like, it's, some of his perceptions, are relatable to lay people, and like reading this, just like, this is not difficult to understand, but they use it as like evidence that like, and they underline, I have no jurisdiction. Counsel for the respondent submitted an argument that the rule of law concerned in this case is primarily whether the police are acting outside the law. We do not agree with that submission. The rule of law demands that everyone obey the law. Significant, organized, deliberate, and persistent defiance of the law and the court orders, is a serious threat to the rule of law, which is both the foundation of a functioning democracy and the refuge of every citizen. By focusing on RCMP conduct, the judge effectively turned a private law matter into a public law one, assessing whether there had been an abuse of authority by police. Whether there had been an abuse of authority by police, rather than focusing on Teal Cedars' interest as a private litigant. The balancing of harms in the civil case was between Teal Cedar and the respondents, and between them there was no contest regarding the magnitude of relative harm. More citations. Accepting that there is a public interest in protecting lawful protest, there are no competing equities to weigh or balance as between protesters engaged in illegal acts and Teal Cedar with its legal right to use logging roads and harvest timber. The concerns legitimately raised by the judge about police conduct are not without remedy. Misconduct affecting the rights of protesters can be addressed both in the prosecution of contempt proceedings and in sentencing. Individuals arrested under an injunction may raise RCMP conduct in their trial, and seek charter remedies. In addition, excuse me, I still haven't heard back from the the scheduler from the Supreme Court in Nanaimo on how I can watch this hearing. So if I don't hear back, I will just do a reading of the interim order that I was given on Sunday. Yeah, Teal Cedar, Verhoeven, 2 p.m. Okay, wow. That was nothing. Um, yeah, that was really nothing. Just rescheduling for February 14th. So now it seems like I'm going to have time to come up with a submission. Um, and I got to find a lawyer to work with, I think. I don't know. Maybe I can do this on my own. Maybe I don't need a lawyer. I don't want to spend money on this. Okay, that's it. I gotta take a break. I'm not gonna continue reading this. Just to end off. Wow. Okay, the last. Okay, I'm not going to keep reading this because it's going to make me angry. But the final two paragraphs. The appeal is allowed, extended to midnight on September 26th, 2022. Teal Cedar is entitled to its costs against the respondents other than the Attorney General of British Columbia. No costs are payable either by or to intervener, Hyatt First Nation. That's it's pretty rough. Here's an interesting line. It is not tenable in a democracy for a group to abandon the democratic process and impose their will on others by force. In a complex, pluralistic society, the democratically elected government makes laws and the courts interpret and uphold them. Barring constitutional overreach, the laws and decisions flowing from them are to be respected and enforced. Neat. Fuck the courts. I said it. Just what a disappointment.